Have you ever heard the tales where snow was deadlier than any bullet? Where the cold cut deeper than the sharpest steel? Out here in the Wild West, the laws were simple: the strong survive, the weak perish. Never trust a stranger, or you won't live to see the dawn, and mercy is a luxury no outlaw can afford. But what happens when those laws collide with compassion? Could a woman who lost her husband, left with 2 hungry children, dare to open her door to a stranger? Did she have the right to spend her last warmth on a dying man while her own children shivered in the dark? And could a man, who had already given up on life, discover a reason to live in the strength of another? They say on the frontier, kindness is weakness. They say trust will get you killed. But this time, the storm brought a different kind of test, not of muscle or gunpowder, but of spirit. And the question remains, what is stronger, the laws of the Wild West, or the laws of the human heart? The plains stretched endlessly, white and merciless, buried under a storm that refused to end. For 3 days, snow had fallen without pause, turning the land into a frozen ocean of silence. The small wooden house stood alone, half buried in drifts, its roof groaning under the weight of winter. Inside, a young woman of 28 moved quietly from corner to corner, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion but lit with a stubborn flame. Her name was not known to the neighbors anymore, few dared to travel in such weather, but to her children she was simply Mama, the last strong wall between them and the storm. Her son, a boy of 7, sat near the fireplace, stacking the last of the split logs into a neat pile. He had his father's sharp eyes but carried worry too old for his small frame. The girl, only 5, clutched a ragged doll against her chest, her cheeks flushed from the cold that seeped through every crack in the cabin walls. They spoke little. Words seemed wasteful in a house where silence weighed heavier than comfort. The woman paused by the window, her hand pressed against the frosted glass. She remembered another winter, not long ago, when her husband's laughter still echoed through these rooms. But the memory ended in gunfire, one night of chaos that had taken him from her forever. Since then, she carried the burden alone. Every day was a battle, and every night, she wondered how much longer she could hold the line. The food was nearly gone. Only a jar of beans, a strip of salted meat, and a heel of bread remained. Worse still, the woodpile outside had shrunk to almost nothing. Each log burned felt like parting with another hour of safety. The storm rattled the shutters as though mocking her resolve. She sat by the fire, sewing a patch into her son's coat, her fingers stiff with cold. She wanted to shield her children from fear, yet the weight of truth pressed down harder than the snow outside. Their home was not strong enough, their supplies not plentiful enough, and she was only one woman fighting against a merciless winter. Still, there was a fierce strength in her eyes. She had survived the loss of her husband, survived the months of loneliness that followed, and she refused to yield now. Yet survival came at a cost: nights without sleep, days filled with endless labor, and the constant ache of hunger that even her children could no longer ignore. That night, as the storm howled louder than before, she lay awake listening to the wind claw at the roof. Every creak of the beam sounded like the house giving up its last breath. She pulled her children close, promising in a whisper that tomorrow would bring warmth, though she no longer believed her own words. When dawn finally arrived, pale and bleak, the woman wrapped herself in a thin cloak. Her heart hammered with dread, but determination guided her hands as she laced her boots. She looked at her son and daughter, their eyes wide with fear. "I'll be back," she told them, though the storm beyond the door looked like a grave waiting to swallow her whole. With one final glance at the dim firelight, she stepped outside. The snow immediately bit into her skin, the wind tearing at her cloak. The world disappeared into white, and with each step forward, she felt as though she were walking deeper into a test set by fate itself. She did not know what she would find in the storm, or if she would return at all. But for her children, she walked on. The storm did not ease when she stepped into it, it grew worse, as if the wind itself resented her courage. Snow clawed at her face, blinding her eyes, and every breath scraped like glass in her lungs. Her thin cloak offered little protection, the cold sank through her skin to the bone. Yet she pressed forward, boots sinking deep into drifts, each step heavier than the last. Behind her, the cabin was already hidden by the storm's white veil. She pictured her children's faces at the window, their hands pressed against the glass, watching their mother vanish into the blizzard. The thought was both a comfort and a torment. She wanted them to believe she was strong, that she could bend the storm to her will, but fear gnawed at her heart, whispering that she might never see them again. The world outside had no shape, only shifting shadows of snow and wind. She stumbled often, the drift swallowing her legs, the ground uncertain beneath her. Still, she searched the horizon for any sign of help, a plume of smoke, a distant light, even the shadow of another traveler. There was nothing. Only endless white. Hours seemed to stretch, though she knew it had been minutes. Her strength waned, her thoughts blurred. Hunger gnawed at her belly, and her hands, stiff and numb, could no longer grip her cloak tightly. A small voice inside begged her to turn back. But when she looked over her shoulder, she saw only the storm. The cabin was gone, erased by the blizzard, as though it had never existed. Panic threatened to break her resolve. She shouted into the wind, but the sound vanished before it left her lips. The storm was not merely weather, it was alive, cruel and endless. Yet in that moment of despair, a flicker appeared in the white chaos. At first, she thought her eyes betrayed her. A shape, dark and unmoving, lay half buried in the snow. Her heart jolted. She stumbled closer, forcing her body against the wind. The figure became clearer, a man, sprawled in the drift, his face pale, his beard crusted with ice. His cloak was torn, his boots caked with frost, his hands frozen stiff against the ground. He did not move. For a heartbeat, terror seized her. Was he alive, or was she staring at another victim of the storm? She dropped to her knees, shaking his shoulder, whispering desperately. No answer. She pressed her hand against his chest, searching for breath. Faint, fragile, but there. He lived. The weight of decision crashed down on her. She could leave him and perhaps save herself, or she could fight to bring him back, risking her own fragile strength. But she thought of her children, waiting in the cold, and knew the answer before the question had finished forming. With trembling arms, she hooked her hands beneath his shoulders and began to drag him through the snow. The storm howled its protest, but she gritted her teeth and pulled. Every step forward felt like an eternity. The man's body was heavy, the snow unyielding, and her muscles screamed in pain. Yet she did not stop. If she failed, both he and she would vanish into the white, and her children would be left to die alone. That thought was unbearable. And so she dragged him, inch by inch, back toward the home that still glowed in her memory, though it was lost somewhere in the blizzard's heart. Her arms felt torn from their sockets by the time the cabin's faint outline appeared through the storm. The man's body dragged heavily behind her, his boots leaving uneven scars across the snow. The sight of the wooden house, with smoke still curling weakly from the chimney, sent a wave of desperate relief through her. She had not been wandering aimlessly. She had found her way back. She shouted, her voice carried away by the wind, but inside the children heard the scrape of boots against the door. The boy pulled it open with all his strength, snow bursting inside, and together they grabbed hold of the stranger's arm. The girl clung to her mother's cloak, her wide eyes full of terror. Help me, the woman gasped, her voice ragged. They half dragged, half carried the man into the cabin, laying him on the floor beside the fire. The warmth of the flames touched his frozen skin, but he did not stir. His lips were blue, his breathing shallow and uneven, as if the storm had already claimed most of him. The woman worked quickly, pushing her own exhaustion aside. She stripped the icy cloak from his shoulders, broke the ice from his beard, and wrapped him in the thickest blankets the house still had. She stirred the pot above the fire, pouring hot broth into a wooden cup, and pressed it to his lips. At first, nothing passed, but she tilted his head gently and managed to coax a few drops down his throat. Hours blurred into a haze of tending and waiting. The man muttered incoherently, caught in fevered dreams. His body shook with chills despite the heat of the fire, and sweat glistened across his brow. She bathed his face with a damp cloth, spooned broth into him whenever he could swallow, and whispered prayers into the darkness though she had not prayed in years. The boy kept the fire alive, carrying the last few logs with a solemnity beyond his age. The girl sat nearby, clutching her doll, whispering questions the woman could not answer. Who was he? Would he die here? Was he dangerous? The woman silenced her gently, though the same doubts gnawed at her own heart. Outside, the storm showed no mercy. The wind screamed against the shutters, rattling the fragile walls, but inside the cabin, a battle of a different kind raged, a fight to keep a stranger from slipping away. She reminded herself why she had done this, not out of charity, not out of weakness, but because to leave him behind would have been to surrender a part of her own humanity. On the second night, when her eyelids burned from sleeplessness, she thought she saw his hand twitch. She leaned closer. His chest rose in a steadier rhythm, his skin no longer as deathly pale. For the first time since she had dragged him from the snow, hope stirred in her heart. She pressed another spoonful of broth to his lips, and this time he swallowed on his own. The smallest of victories, but in that moment, it felt like a miracle. The woman glanced at her children, who watched in silence. She gave them a tired smile and whispered, "He's still with us." The storm howled outside, but within the small cabin, a fragile thread of life had been tied between them and the stranger. It was enough to keep her going for one more night. The days blended together, measured not by the sun but by the rhythm of his breathing. The storm outside howled on, erasing all sense of time, while inside the cabin every moment revolved around the stranger's fragile life. He lay still, his skin pale beneath the thick beard, his body shuddering with waves of fever. The fire never slept, the boy kept it alive, adding stick after stick, as if flame itself was the rope holding the man to this world. The woman sat beside him most of the time, her hand often resting on his brow. Sometimes it burned like fire, sometimes it turned as cold as the snow she had dragged him from. She wiped away sweat with a cloth, whispered encouragements he could not hear, and forced broth past his lips when his strength allowed it. Each swallow was a small victory, though she feared they might not be enough. The girl lingered close, quiet and watchful, clutching her doll as though it could protect her. She asked questions in whispers. "Mama, will he wake up? Is he going to stay with us?" The woman had no answers, only a tired smile and a soft squeeze of her daughter's hand. Deep inside, fear gnawed at her. Bringing him into their home might have saved his life, or it might bring ruin to theirs. Yet abandoning him in the storm had never been an option. At night, when the children slept, the woman sat by the fire, staring into the flames until her eyes blurred. Loneliness pressed heavily against her shoulders. The stranger breathed raggedly on the bed behind her, and she thought of her husband. His absence had left an emptiness she had learned to hide, but in moments like these it threatened to swallow her whole. This house, once filled with laughter, was now haunted by silence and the echo of a life that had ended too soon. On the third morning, the fever broke for a while. The man stirred, his eyes fluttering open just enough for her to glimpse their color, a stormy gray, dulled by weakness. His lips moved, but no words came out, only a dry rasp. She pressed water to his mouth, and he drank greedily before slipping back into restless dreams. That glimpse was enough to strengthen her resolve. She could not let him go, not after carrying his weight through the storm, not after watching over him night after night. She would keep fighting for him, even if she did not know his name. The cabin became a place of waiting. The children learned to speak in hushed tones, their games quiet so as not to disturb the man. The boy chopped the smallest pieces of wood with careful strokes, imitating the way his father once had, while the girl hummed songs to her doll, songs she half remembered from warmer days. Outside, the blizzard clawed at the windows, relentless. Inside, 3 hearts clung to hope that the fourth, this silent stranger, would beat strongly again. And though fear still sat in the woman's chest, she realized something unexpected. For the first time since her husband's death, the house no longer felt entirely empty. On the 4th morning, the house woke not to silence, but to a low groan. The woman, stirring the pot of thin broth, froze with the spoon in her hand. She turned, hardly daring to believe her ears. The stranger shifted beneath the blankets, his face no longer ghostly pale but flushed with lingering fever. His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the dim light of the fire. For a moment, he looked lost, like a man returned from some other world. His gaze darted around the cabin, the rough wooden beams, the small hearth, the two children watching him from the corner, and finally rested on the woman. His lips parted, a cracked whisper escaping, "Where am I?" "You're safe," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "You were found in the snow. You've been here for days." He tried to rise, but his body betrayed him, trembling with weakness. She pressed a firm hand against his chest. "Rest. You're not strong enough yet." The boy fetched a cup of water, and the woman held it to the stranger's lips. He drank greedily, coughing, then sagged back into the blankets with a sigh that carried both relief and shame. His storm-gray eyes flickered to the children, then back to her. Why did you save me?" Her answer was steady. "Because I couldn't leave you there." For a long while he lay silent, as if weighing her words. Finally, in a hoarse voice, he began to speak. He told them of his ranch, a sprawling piece of land not far from the mountains, once thriving with cattle and horses. He had been a man of means, proud and secure. But fate had dealt him a cruel hand. A fire, swift and merciless, had swept across his land. The stables, the barns, even the house, everything turned to ash in a single night. He spoke with bitterness, but beneath his words lay a grief too heavy to hide. "I lost it all," he murmured. "Every animal, every board, every coin. Years of work, gone." His eyes dropped, ashamed. "I thought I was a man who could not be broken. But when I watched the flames take it all, I knew I had nothing left." The woman listened in silence. She knew loss, though hers had come at the end of a gun rather than a fire. Pain was pain, no matter its form. He closed his eyes, his voice softening. "I wandered after that. Days, maybe weeks, I don't remember. The storm caught me. I thought perhaps it would finish what the fire began." His words faded, exhaustion pulling him back toward sleep. The woman adjusted the blankets around him, her heart heavy with the weight of his confession. He was not just a stranger saved from the snow. He was a man hollowed out by tragedy, as lost as she herself had once been. That night, as the storm continued its endless assault on the cabin, she sat awake by the fire. Her children slept curled together, the stranger resting fitfully nearby. For the first time, she wondered not only if she had saved his life, but if perhaps he had been sent to change hers. By the fifth day, strength began to return to the stranger's limbs. His steps were unsteady at first, his body still weakened from fever and frostbite, but he refused to lie idle any longer. The woman urged him to rest, yet he only shook his head. "If I'm to stay under your roof," he said, his voice low but firm, "I'll not be dead weight." That morning, with the boy watching closely, he lifted the axe from beside the hearth. His hands trembled on the handle, and for a moment she thought he would collapse. But then he set his jaw and drove the blade into a log. The crack echoed through the cabin like a promise. Would split cleanly, and for the first time in weeks, the fire pile began to grow instead of shrink. The boy's eyes widened, and he grinned with something close to admiration. Through the following days, the stranger busied himself with whatever tasks he could manage. He climbed to the roof despite the bitter wind, patching holes where snow had begun to seep through. He cleared paths through the drifts so the children could move more freely. He even repaired the old door latch that had rattled loose in the storm. The house, once fragile and battered, began to feel sturdier under his touch. The children, cautious at first, warmed quickly to his presence. The boy followed him everywhere, studying how he swung the axe or hammered nails. The girl, though shy, offered him her doll once, placing it beside him while he mended the latch. He laughed softly at the gesture, his grey eyes softening in a way the woman had not seen before. In the evenings, when work was done, the stranger sat by the fire with them. He told small stories, simple things, fragments of his old life. Of wild horses he once rode, of cattle drives under the scorching sun, of a ranch that had thrummed with life before the flames devoured it. His voice held both pride and sorrow. but the children listened wide-eyed, leaning close as though every word was a treasure. The woman watched all this with mixed feelings. Gratitude, yes, his labor kept them warmer, safer. But also unease. She had built her life on self-reliance after her husband's death. Accepting help felt like weakness, as if it betrayed the vow she had made to survive alone. And yet, every time she saw the children laugh at one of his stories, or found the fire blazing brighter because of his work, the weight on her shoulders lifted just a little. Still, she kept her distance. Her heart was not ready to open. Grief had carved a hollow inside her, one she guarded fiercely. She would not allow hope to rush in too soon. But as she watched the stranger with her children, saw the way he listened to them, patient and gentle, she felt the first cracks forming in the walls she had built around herself. The storm still raged beyond the walls, but inside, warmth was returning, log by log, smile by smile. The storm outside showed no mercy. Wind roared across the plains, piling drifts against the cabin walls, but within those walls, the air was heavy with a different kind of silence. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the room. The children slept, huddled together beneath quilts, their small breath steady in the hush of night. The woman sat near the window, mending a torn sleeve by the faint glow of lantern light. Across from her, the stranger sat with his shoulders bowed, his grey eyes fixed on the storm beyond the glass. For a long time he said nothing, and she let the silence linger. She had learned that words came slowly to him, weighted with meaning when they finally arrived. At last, he spoke. His voice was rough, but steady. There was a night, not long ago, when I thought of ending it. The fire took everything. My land, my home, even my pride. I sat with a gun in my hand, wondering if there was any reason left to keep breathing. The needle stilled in her hand. She looked at him, his face drawn in the flickering light, and saw the raw truth in his confession. "And what stopped you?" she asked quietly. He exhaled, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "Cowardice, maybe. Or something stronger. I don't know. But when I walked into that storm, I thought I was letting it decide for me. I didn't care if I lived or died." He turned then, his gaze locking with hers. "And yet here I am. Because of you." The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket, both heavy and warm. She thought of the night she dragged him through the snow, of the countless times she had almost given in to despair herself. She knew what it was to feel hollow, to wonder if life had anything left to offer. In his voice, she heard her own past echoed back to her. She rose and crossed the room, her bare feet soft against the wooden floor. For a moment she hesitated, then placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "You don't need to thank me," she whispered. "Just don't waste the chance you were given. You have a reason now." He looked at her hand, then at her face. His eyes shone with something fragile, something that looked almost like hope. "A reason?" Her lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "Yes. Now you have us." Outside, the wind screamed, battering the walls as though determined to tear the cabin apart. But the fire flared as he fed another log into it, and the light grew stronger, painting their faces in gold. The storm was still fierce, but the small home glowed like a beacon against the endless dark. From a distance, the cabin looked fragile, nearly swallowed by snow. Yet its windows shone warm, defiant. A family, broken, rebuilt, unexpected, sat within, and in that glow lay the promise of survival, and of beginnings yet to come.